Reimagining law through the lens of gender and power. Good day, everyone. Today we are going to explore feminist legal theory, also known as feminist jurisprudence. Now, this field that challenges a long-held myth. And what is that? That law is neutral, objective, and gender-blind. Pero kung titingnan natin sa kasaysayan, makikita natin na ang batas ay madalas isinulat, ipinatupad, at ipinaliwanag mula sa karanasan ng mga kalalakihan. Feminist legal theory unmasks this bias and asks whose experiences does the law really serve? It seeks to reveal how law has perpetuated women's subordination and to propose legal frameworks that reflect women's realities and lived experiences. Sa madaling sabi, ito ay proyekto ng unmasking and reconstruction, pagbubunyag ng mga biases ng batas at sabay na pagtatayo ng mas makatarungan at makataong balangkas ng hustisya. So by the end of this lecture, we expect that we will be able to first recognize that feminist legal theory is not just about women's issues, but about rethinking justice itself. Second, we connect the feminist theory to concrete legal reforms like gender-sensitive jurisprudence, equality laws, and human rights advocacy. And finally, apply its insight to local contexts, especially sa ating Philippine legal system na patuloy na hinahamon ng gender inequality, discrimination, at cultural patriarchy. Feminist legal theory began with a radical insight. Law is not neutral. It carries the voice, values, and assumptions of those who wrote it. And for centuries, those writers were men. Anne Scales, a Harvard scholar, coined the term feminist jurisprudence in 1978. That same year, Harvard the Women's Law Journal was launched, marking the academic birth of feminist legal studies. Pero bago pa man yan, matagal nang lumalaban ang mga kababaihan mula sa the right to suffrage movement hanggang sa kampanya laban sa marital rape at domestic violence. Now, these struggles showed that the law not only reflected male privilege, it also enforced it. Feminist legal theory has a double task. Una, diagnostic, to reveal how laws encode gender inequality. Pangalawa, constructive, to rebuild the law so that it mirrors the full diversity of human experience. For example, rape laws once required corroboration or evidence of utmost resistance. Bakit? Because they were written from the assumption that women often lie. Feminist theorists exposed this as structural bias. Then they fought to reconstruct those rules, leading to rape shield laws and trauma-informed judicial practice. Through the 1980s, feminist legal theory became institutionalized. Martha Feynman created the Feminism and Legal Theory Project, FLT project, gathering scholars who wanted to rethink family, care, and dependency. She argued that the myth of the autonomous individual, central to liberal law, excludes women whose labor in caregiving sustains society but remains invisible. By the 1990s, third-wave feminism, influenced by Kimberly Crenshaw, introduced intersectionality, showing that oppression is never one-dimensional. Race, class, sexuality, and colonial history intersect with gender. Sa madaling sabi, hindi lang babae ang pinag-uusapan, kundi iba't ibang karanasan ng kababaihan sa iba't ibang konteksto. The second wave of feminism, that is from 1960s to 1980s, fought for equality in the public sphere, employment, politics, reproductive rights. It exposed sexual harassment and domestic violence as public wrongs, not private shame. The third wave expanded the horizon. It said, not all women experience oppression in the same way. For example, a poor rural woman faces different barriers than a corporate lawyer. So in the Philippines, think of how Lumad, Moro, and urban poor women each navigate law differently. Intersectionality became the key concept to link these realities. Globally, feminist legal theory has influenced treaties like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW, often called the International Bill of Rights for Women. Locally, we see its imprint in Republic Act 9710, otherwise known as the Magna Carta of Women, and the Republic Act 11313, the Safe Spaces Act, or yung Bawal Bastos Law. These laws define violence broadly, cover gender-based online harassment, and institutionalize gender mainstreaming in government policy. Kaya makikita natin mula Geneva hanggang Quezon City Hall, feminist legal theory has reshaped law's very language. So from margins to mainstream. Now, before, feminist jurisprudence, ideological or too political. Now, it's part of core curriculum of law schools and judicial training. Now, each model offers different and distinct lens. Now, think of them as different ways to receive the law. Liberal equality, sexual difference, dominance, anti-essentialist, intersectional, postmodern. Some seek inclusion within existing structures. Others want to transform or even deconstruct those structures entirely. Now, let's have the liberal equality model. Liberal feminists believe justice comes from equal treatment. If men can vote, so should women. If men can own property, so should women. Now, this model fits within liberal democracy, fighting inequality through inclusion. However, critics like Kimberly Crenshaw point out equal treatment does not solve unequal realities. A policy that treats everyone the same can still disadvantage women who start from different social position. Equality is not sameness. It is about equal dignity and outcome, not just opportunity. Then we have the sexual difference model. This model argues women experience the world differently, and law must recognize that difference. Gilligan's, in her work In a Different Voice, showed that moral reasoning among women often centers on care and relationships, not abstract rights. Now, Robin West later argued that traditional law ignores the body, especially the female body, and the reality of dependency. Thus, feminist law should value caregiving, maternity, and relational life. Policies like paid maternity leave or care credits are examples, pero may babala rin. Overemphasizing difference could reinforce stereotypes. Hence, the ongoing debate, sameness versus difference, remains central to feminist jurisprudence. Then we have the dominance model. Catherine McKinnon took feminism further. For her, the real problem is not difference but power. The law, she says, sees and treats women the way men see and treat women. McKinnon's analysis of sexual harassment was groundbreaking. She argued it is not just personal misconduct, it is systemic sex discrimination. This insight redefined U.S. civil rights law and inspired similar frameworks worldwide. Her critique of pornography also shook liberal ideas of free speech. If speech commodifies women's pain, can it still be called freedom? She taught us neutral law is in a non-neutral society only protects privilege. Then we have the anti-essentialist or intersectional model. This model rejects the idea that there is a single woman's experience. Crenshaw's intersectionality reveals that oppression is multidimensional. For instance, a black woman or an indigenous woman cannot separate her gender from her race or class. In Philippine terms, now consider a lumad, a woman activist who faces state harassment. Her struggle involves gender, ethnicity, and poverty, all intertwined. Now, Mari Matsuda's idea of multiple consciousness says, those on the margins learn to see from many perspectives at once, and this insight is a gift to jurisprudence. Hence, intersectional feminism pushes law to recognize complex identities and contextual justice. Then we have the postmodern feminism. Postmodern feminists question the very categories we use. Who decides what woman means? What counts as law? Now, Judith Butler argues gender is not essence but performance. A script society forces us to play. Feminist postmodernists therefore deconstruct binaries, male-female, public-private, rational-emotional. Now, in law, this means interrogating how legal language constructs reality. For example, the term reasonable man assumes a certain body, class, and culture. Postmodernism invites us to dismantle these linguistic prisons and imagine more fluid, inclusive legal vocabularies. And we have the hedonic jurisprudence. This introduces the dimension of feeling, pain, pleasure, suffering. For centuries, courts doubted women's testimonies in rape or abuse cases. Judges demanded visible injury or physical resistance. This legal skepticism created epistemic injustice, the denial of women's credibility. Robin West and McKinnon highlight how law privileges reason over emotion. But pain is knowledge. It tells truths about injustice. Hence, hedonic jurisprudence insists that emotional and psychological harm must count legally. In the Philippines, the case of People versus Hinosa recognized battered woman syndrome, a feminist victory showing that pain has evidentiary value. These reforms show theory in action. Feminist scholarship inspired real changes in criminal procedure and evidence. Victim impact statements allow survivors to speak of their pain before sentencing. Gender sensitivity training teaches judges to avoid re-traumatizing witnesses. We have the PhilJA, Philippine Judicial Academy's continuing judicial education programs reflect this influence. Training magistrates to see law not as mechanical application of rules but as a moral practice attentive to human dignity. Lady Hale expanded the definition of domestic violence to include psychological and emotional harm. She said, abuse need not leave bruises to break a person. Her reasoning exemplifies context-sensitive justice, the hallmark of feminist judging. In our jurisdiction, Republic Act 9262, or the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act, mirrors this logic. It recognizes emotional, sexual, and economic abuse, showing the shift from formal equality to substantive, emphatic justice. Globally, feminist legal theory helped shape constitutions and human rights instruments. The CEDAW Committee's General Recommendations 1935 established that violence against women is a form of discrimination. South Africa's Constitutional Court, in the case of Baloyi, declared domestic violence a structural injustice, not merely a private wrong. Now, in Canada, Section 15 jurisprudence on equality reflects feminist principles of substantive equality. At home, here in the Philippines, Republic Act 9710 and RA 11313 carry these ideals, translating feminist reasoning into enforceable rights. Today, law schools include courses on gender and the law, intersectionality, and feminist jurisprudence. These classes challenge future lawyers to see beyond technicalities toward the moral and social dimension of law. Judicial institutions like PhilJA and the National Judicial Institute of Canada have adopted trauma-informed education. It teaches judges to understand how trauma affects memory, testimony, and demeanor. This is feminist theory in action, embedding empathy within legal reasoning. But the struggle is far from over. Feminist legal theory still faces resistance from formalists who see empathy as bias or from systems that cling to patriarchal privilege. Now, there is also the challenge of inclusion, ensuring feminist theory speaks not only for elite women but all women and gender minorities. That is why contemporary feminist jurisprudence dialogues with queer theory, critical race theory, and post-colonial studies to remain alive, dynamic, and responsive. Feminist jurisprudence has transformed the question of justice itself. It tells us law must not only think, it must also feel. It must recognize pain, validate the voice, and respond to context. As Catherine McKinnon wrote, the law sees and treats women the way men see and treat women. Feminist legal theory invites us to change that vision, to build a legal order that reflects not hierarchy but human dignity. Kaya bilang mga estudyante at tagapagtaguyod ng batas, our task is clear: to make the law not merely a system of rules, but a community of care. Thank you very much. God bless you all.